You appear in their sleep, not as a background figure, not as the kind of peripheral presence that surfaces in dreams and dissolves before the morning has fully organized itself. You appear with the specific, vivid, insistently real quality of someone who occupies the dreaming mind because they are occupying the waking mind at a level that the waking mind has no adequate container for. The dreams are the overflow. When what someone carries about another person becomes too large for the conscious hours to hold entirely, it finds the rest of its expression in the hours when the conscious management of what is too large is suspended. When the interior simply produces what it is actually full of, rather than what the person has decided is safe to be full of, they dream about you repeatedly with a consistency that has become its own kind of signal that they cannot dismiss as a passing preoccupation. That returns often enough and with enough specificity to be understood as something the interior is trying to communicate rather than simply something the interior is producing at random. And then they wrote it down. I want to begin with the message because the title says you never expected it, and that unexpectedness is the most important context for understanding what it means. You are not monitoring this channel. Whatever the form the message takes when it arrives, whether it is a text or an email or a message through a platform or a reaching out through someone you share in common, the source is someone you had not organized your expectations around hearing from in this form. Someone whose movement toward communication was not on any timeline you were tracking. Someone who existed in a category in your understanding of your current situation that did not have reaching out as an expected behavior. That is why it shocks you. Not the content alone, the source in combination with the content, the specific slightly disorienting experience of receiving something significant from a direction you were not watching. The message exists. It is either already composed or in the final stages of being composed, either already sent and waiting to be found by you, or sitting in a draft somewhere, held by the last remaining hesitation before the send. Either way, it is real. And when it reaches you, the shock is going to be immediate. Let me tell you what the message says. Not in the specific words. Those belong to the person writing them, and they will arrive in their own form at the right moment. But in the essential content, in the thing the words are in service of, regardless of which particular words are chosen, they are telling you that you have been present. Not in the past tense only, in the continuous, ongoing, cannot be interrupted present tense of someone who is still present, who has been present through whatever time has passed since the last significant contact between you, who has remained present through everything that has continued to happen in their life without your direct participation in it. You stayed present in them even in your absence. That is what the message is saying. And underneath that, something more specific. The dreams. The fact of the dreams is something they have decided to tell you to include in what they are reaching out to say. To offer as the evidence that is perhaps the most undeniable and the most honest piece of what they are communicating. Because sharing that you dream about someone is one of the more vulnerable things available to say. It is information that cannot be walked back, cannot be reframed as something more casual, cannot be softened into friendship or general affection in the way that some expressions of feeling can be softened when the reception is uncertain. It is direct, and they chose it because sharing that you dream about someone is one of the more vulnerable things available to say. It is information that cannot be walked back, cannot be reframed as something more casual, cannot be softened into friendship or general affection in the way that some expressions of feeling can be softened when the reception is uncertain. It is direct, and they chose it. I want to stay with that choice for a moment because I think the choosing of the dreams as the specific piece to share tells you something important. Of all the things they could have said, of all the ways they could have reached out, of all the expressions of what they feel that would have been safer to offer because they are more deniable, more reversible, more easily framed as something other than what they actually are, they chose the dreams, which means they chose the most unambiguous evidence, the piece that most directly communicates the level of presence you have in their interior without the protective layer of language that can be interpreted in multiple directions. The piece that, once shared, makes it impossible for you or for them to pretend that what is being communicated is minor or casual or something less than what it actually is. They chose to make the communication impossible, to minimize. That is not an accident. That is the choice of someone who has decided that what they feel deserves to be received at its actual size rather than at the more comfortable, smaller version. I want to speak to what the dreams themselves contain because the dreaming is the part of this reading that has the most specific texture, and I want to give you that texture rather than leaving the dreams as a vague romantic notion. They are not passive. The dreams I am reading do not have the quality of scenarios in which this person is simply watching you from a distance. They have the quality of interaction, of conversation, of the specific close quality of being fully in someone's presence in the way that dreaming allows presence to be more complete than waking life sometimes permits. The version of you that appears in their dreams is not a projection or a fantasy or a constructed ideal. It is specifically you, with the specific things you say and the specific way you say them and the specific quality of your particular attention when you are fully engaged with something. With the humor that is recognizably yours and the seriousness that is recognizably yours and the particular combination of both that makes you distinct from any other presence, the dreaming mind does not generalize. When it returns to something repeatedly, it returns to the specific version of it. And what it has been returning to specifically and consistently and with the particular fidelity of something that is not being distorted by the softening that conscious memory sometimes applies is you, as you actually are, not idealized, real. I want to speak to this person's experience of waking up from these dreams because the experience of them does not end with the waking. And I think understanding what the mornings have been like for them will give you the full picture of what is being sent in the message. There is a specific quality of disappointment, not the devastating kind, the specific, slightly disorienting, quietly persistent kind that comes from having been somewhere in the interior and then being returned to the exterior to find that the somewhere is not here in the way it was there. That the vividness and the closeness and the specific quality of what it felt like to be in your presence in the dream has not transferred into the waking reality. They wake up and you are not there. And the not there has a shape to it, has the specific outlined absence of something whose presence was just fully felt, has the quality of a room from which something specific has been removed rather than the general undifferentiated quality of an ordinary room. This has been happening repeatedly, and the accumulation of those mornings, of those specific absences that have the specific shape of you, has been building toward something, toward the decision that the not there has become more present than can be continued to be managed simply by managing the waking hours. The message is the response to those mornings. The message is the response to those mornings. I want to describe one more quality of those mornings that I think is the most honest piece of what has been driving the message toward being sent. In the first moments of waking, before the day has fully organized its requirements and the mind has settled back into its ordinary operational mode, there is a window of unusual honesty, where the interior and the exterior have not yet reassembled the usual distance between them, where whatever the interior is actually full of is still present at the surface before the surface has been managed back into its daily presentation. In those windows, you, not as a thought they are choosing to have, as simply what is there when there is not yet the management of what is there. Every morning, for a significant stretch of time, the accumulation of that, of being what is present at the surface of another person's consciousness in those unmanaged moments every single day, produces a weight that eventually has only one release. Saying something, and they are finally saying something. Tell me in the comments if you know who this is, not with their name, with a yes or a no. Whether someone arrived clearly in your awareness as I was describing the dreams, the mornings, the message being composed, whether the reading is landing on an actual person in your actual life, or whether it feels more diffuse, more collective. Tell me. I read everything. I want to speak to your experience of receiving this message when it arrives, because the shock the title promises is real, and knowing what it contains will help you be present for it rather than managing it from a distance. Your first response will be to check if it is real, not out loud, in the specific internal way that the Virgo mind verifies things before it allows them to fully land. The rapid, almost involuntary assessment of whether the message is what it appears to be, whether the words mean what they say, whether the reaching out is genuine, or whether there is a subtext that softens the apparent meaning into something smaller and more manageable. The message is what it appears to be. I want to tell you that directly so that the verification process does not consume the moment of receiving something that deserves to be received fully, so that you do not spend the first moments of the message's arrival in the careful, analytical work of assessing whether it is safe to let it matter when it is entirely safe to let it matter. It is real. The dreams are real. The decision to tell you about them is real. And the person who made that decision did not make it lightly or casually or as a tactic or as anything other than the specific, vulnerable, finally having done it, honesty of someone who has been carrying something that required a particular quality of readiness to share. They reached that readiness and they reached toward you. I want to speak to what the words specifically do to you when you read them, because the shock is named in the title, and I want to give it its specificity rather than leaving it as a general promise of impact. There is going to be a moment of stillness. The specific full system stillness of someone who is reading something and understanding simultaneously that what they are reading is significant, that the ordinary processing of incoming information has encountered something that requires a different quality of attention than the ordinary processing provides, that the bandwidth required by what is arriving exceeds the bandwidth of normal operation. In that moment, you will read the same words twice. Not because you did not understand them the first time, because the understanding the first time was cognitive, and the second reading is something else, is the full landing of what was understood cognitively, is the registering of the meaning at the level where it actually matters, rather than the level where it is simply process. Read them twice, read them as many times as the landing requires. Do not rush to your response before the message has fully arrived. Let me speak to what you do after. Not a strategy for how to respond in a way that produces a particular outcome. What you do with what has arrived in your interior before any external response is formulated. You feel it. The specific, unmanaged, pre-response version of what the message produces in you. The thing that is there before you have decided what to do with it. Before the considerations about timing and appropriateness and what the response will communicate and how it will be received have begun to operate. The thing that is simply there, because what the message is asking for is not a carefully calibrated response. It is your actual interior, the honest, unfiltered, this is what I feel version of you that the person writing the message has been dreaming about. The one that does not manage its expressions into something safer before they are offered. What do you actually feel when you read those words? Not what you think you should feel, not what would be the appropriate response given the history and the context and the various considerations that make this complicated. What is actually there in the first unguarded moment of reading something you never expected to receive from this particular person? That is the only response worth giving, whatever form it takes when you are ready to give it. I want to address something about the timing of this message that I think matters for how you receive it. It arrives when they are ready, not when it would have been most convenient, not in the window that your own timeline might have identified as the ideal moment, not calibrated to any external consideration except the specific internal readiness of the person sending it. They had to get ready. The message you are receiving is not the message they almost sent 6 months ago. It is the message they have arrived at through the specific process of their own reckoning with what they feel and what they want and what they are willing to offer and what kind of courage they are capable of in the service of something that matters to them. The version that arrives is the honest version, not a rough draft, not a version that was sent before the person was fully prepared to mean it. The version that had to be earned through the process of becoming the person who is ready to say it. That readiness changes what it means, because a message sent before someone was ready to mean it fully carries the hedging of not quite readiness, has exits built into it, has the specific self-protective quality of something that can be walked back if the vulnerability of having sent it becomes too much. What is coming does not have those exits. It is fully sent. What is coming does not have those exits. It is fully sent. I want to describe what it feels like to be the person who has finally sent a fully meant message after a long period of holding it, because I think understanding their experience in that moment will help you understand what they are bringing to you when it arrives. It feels like putting something down, not a specific object, the weight of the not yet said, the specific, continuous, quietly exhausting weight of something that wanted to be said and was being held back from being said by whatever the particular hesitation was. And the moment it is finally sent, the weight that the holding back required simply stops being required. There is a lightness, immediate and slightly unexpected, not because the response is known. The response is not known, but because the doing of a thing that needed to be done produces its own specific quality of relief that is independent of outcome. That exists in the completion itself rather than in the confirmation that the completion produced what was hoped for. They feel lighter right now, having sent it, having done the thing, having moved from the indefinite, open-ended, continuously renewable period of holding the message to the specific, finite, irrevocable moment of having released it, and within the lightness, something else, a quality of vulnerability that is not entirely comfortable, but that is more honest than the weight that preceded it. They are exposed in a way they have not been in a while, and it required them to decide that your knowing was worth that exposure. As we close, I want to leave you with the image that has been present throughout this entire reading. Someone lying awake in the hour before the sending, not composing anymore, done composing, holding the phone or the keyboard or whatever form the message is taken with the specific final moment quality of someone who is about to do something irreversible and is giving themselves one last moment in the before and then sending it, not dramatically, with the specific, quiet, slightly relieved quality of something that has finally been done after a long time of being nearly done, of something that was always going to be sent arriving at the moment when the not sending was no longer supportable. It is sent, it is on its way to you. And when it arrives, Virgo, the word shocked is going to feel like an understatement, because some things, when they come from the person and in the form you least expected them, are not simply surprising. They are the specific, breathtaking experience of a universe that has been paying attention to your story, deciding to show you that it has been paying attention. That is what this message is. Evidence that your story is still being written, and that the next chapter begins with these words.